The Long Dark Night, Chapter 2, First Part. With a soft rasp of steel, the rider in black returned his sword to the sheath on his back. To Annette's utter astonishment, he seemed ready to keep going with it so much as a glance at her. His black sidewalk horse was about to pass right by the coach. "Wait," she shouted, running toward him. But as soon as she did, she reeled. The rider was so handsome. He was like some lovely dream from which she couldn't awaken, and she was paralyzed both in heart and mind. Her fear of death had been lacquered over with fascination. Shaking her head to clear it, she shouted, "I'm Annette Krishkin. My father is the mayor of the village of Krishkin. See me home. You won't regret it." Annette figured paying him twice the usual rate would probably suffice. The horse and rider continued off in silence. "Wait. No, wait." Sending great splashes up from the ground, which had largely been reduced to mud, Annette dashed out in front of the horse and grabbed hold of its bridle. "I'm in trouble here. Would you just leave a woman in a place like this?" she said, her angry tone jolting to the fore. She was being jerked forward with each step the horse took. "Stop, please. Just stop." "You're headed in the wrong direction, princess." The hoarse voice swiftly drained Annette of her strength. It was simply too much at odds with the face the lightning had shown her moments earlier. "Do something. A few minutes ago, that villain said his friends would be right behind you, didn't he? They're after me. The nobles of the Xeno clan were supposed to have been exterminated ages ago. And now they're back. I can't believe this." "Xeno, eh? If they're back." "If they're back, it'd be the 5 that were said to have fled to somewhere in the castle. Grand Duke Xeno's son, and 4 of his cousins. They're real trouble, to be sure." Annette got the feeling that hoarse voice was neither addressed toward her nor engaged in soliloquy. "There is something you could do," the voice continued. "What?" "You can hire us. Whatever money you've got on hand will do for a down payment, with the balance due once you're safely home." "How much?" Annette asked, regaining some of her calm, even as she was dragged along. "Given the distance to the village of Krishkin, and the fact that it's in the opposite direction, plus the strength of the opposition, that'll be $100,000. "You must be joking," Annette snapped, and in her anger she let go of the steed's bridle that she'd latched onto. There in the rain and mud, she stood like a defiant deity. The road was just beginning its downward slope. "For someone so good-looking," she said, and, beginning to drift into infatuation, she desperately fought to regain control enough to continue. "You have the heart of a loan shark, you know that? $100,000 to bring me home? Why, that's enough to run a small village for half a year. $5,000 should be more than enough to suffice." "Oh? And where do you get that?" Donning a perplexed expression, Annette gave the question some consideration. After advancing 5 or 6 paces down the slope, along with the horse, she continued. A long time ago, I was kidnapped by a band of outlaws, and the warrior who rescued me got $5,000. And what's more, he had to deal with 20 of them. You're only up against 5. No, make that 4 now. You're quite proficient at your trade, aren't you? You simply have to take care of the other 4. I did that one just now because he came to me. The hoarse voice had been replaced by one of steel. So lovely, but with a sternness radiating from its depths. Annette thought the blood was freezing in her veins. It wasn't fear alone that froze it. Was that supposed to mean he wouldn't simply take care of the rest? Not knowing for sure, Annette was almost like a sleepwalker as she extended a pair of fingers and called to the leaving rider. $20,000. And even managing that much was something of a feat. No reaction. 30,000. Though she was sure there was no point in further negotiations with the rider, just to be on the safe side, she said 50,000. Okay, princess. Throw in the towel already. The hoarse voice had returned. Damn it, she thought. 53,000. The hoarse voice laughed. Mockingly it said, "Oh, look at that. His friends are coming. They're making their way up the pass. They'll be here in 3 minutes." 55,000. The hoarse voice fell silent. Through the now louder pounding of the rain, Annette thought she could hear the sound of iron-shod hooves climbing the pass. Extortionist. Okay, I'll pay you 100,000. But I only have 10,000 on me, so you'll receive the balance once I'm home. Good enough, the hoarse voice said, sounding relieved. So, do you want to ride this horse? Or would you prefer the coach? And meet the same fate as the driver? No, thank you. I'll ride with you. Wait just a moment, and I'll go fetch my luggage. Just bring your purse. I don't believe you. Okay. Collecting the hem of her skirt in both hands, the girl returned to the coach and pulled a compact raincoat from the same bag that held her purse. Pulling it over her head, she came back with bag in hand, grumbling all the while about how he didn't offer her a hand up, and that they didn't have time for this. She climbed on behind the rider and wrapped her arms around his waist. That made her feel safer, or it should have, but through her arms his body felt hard and cold as steel. "Lord," she murmured in spite of herself. "What's your problem now?" a hoarse voice inquired. "It ain't bad enough you're a tightwad." The horse had already turned around and begun traveling in the direction Annette desired. When they'd passed the stationary cyborg horse and the bisected corpse of Baron Hayden, and had come alongside the coach, Annette heard the rasp of the sword being drawn from the back right in front of her. Reaching out one hand, the rider grabbed the reins to the coach. He tied them to his saddle horn, and as soon as he let go of the reins, they stretched like a rope. With one horse following along behind the pair, logically, the girl knew that the rider must have used his blade to cut the traces between the coach and the horses, drawing it in the blink of an eye. It had literally been faster than the eye could follow. After advancing another 5 or 6 paces, the horse stopped. An indescribable air of weirdness enveloped Annette. It had builded up the road from the slope. At the same time, she heard something. The sound of hoofbeats. Like a spectral steed galloping out of the depths of the earth. And there was more than one horse coming. The unearthly air of evil billowing toward them grew denser and more unsettling, seeping into the very flesh. Despair sapped Annette's will. She couldn't get away. They'd come back from hell to pursue her, and she was fated to fall victim to their fangs. They would drain the blood from her, making her a demon of the night who would seek the lifeblood of humans, just as they did. Why did she have to come back here? She could have stayed back in the capital, enjoying her comfortable life as a student on the sizable allowance she received. What about her life? And look, now this guy couldn't even move a muscle. The approaching hoofbeats halted. They'd completed the climb. They were coming. They were going to attack. Her consciousness rapidly began to dwindle. She was so afraid. She was about to pass out. And at that very moment, they started forward. Their horse and its riders. The road to the top of the pass wasn't wide enough for 2 wagons to travel abreast, so every so often spaces had been set aside, where someone going in the opposite direction could pull out of the way. The enemy blocked the center of the road, making it impossible for the young man and Annette to pass. Nevertheless, the rider in black and his steed pressed on. The flashing lightning picked out dark silhouettes halted up ahead. Try as she might to see them, Annette couldn't even make out their outlines in the instant before they faded back into the darkness. Illuminated by the lightning was the glittering gates to the land of the dead. The 2 of them headed right for it. Was it that the rider didn't fear death? Or did he not even know what death was? Arms still wrapped around the waist of steel, Annette shut her eyes. Her body trembled abruptly. It was a result of the supernatural aura that came from up ahead. But that air was suddenly shaken. As the unearthly air and her own trembling dwindled, Annette focused her gaze to the floor. Look. Where the shadowy figures rank like a threat against the very darkness, not pulling off to the right. Like vassals bowing before their king, like fiends cowed by a hero. The rain still lashed the pair viciously, and the wind still harangued their mount, and the horse that followed them. Yet the young man rode on into the night with the girl and the horses, not so much as drawing his blade. Annette caught a sound she'd heard before. It was one her father often made the night before the village financial reports were presented, as he studied the documents in his office. It was one condemned criminals in the capital tried to choke back as they climbed the 13 steps to their place of execution. The sound of grinding teeth. Hating, cursing, regretting, as the pair passed right by them while they could only watch in silence. The nobles hated themselves so much they could die. Cursed themselves. Regretted what they were. How many times over that would grow, becoming malice when they assailed the pair. However, as they rode through the pass, Annette's heart was pounding with excitement, for she had seen the shadowy figure's face etched by a flash of lightning. She knew the legends of the Zeno clan, the power and cruelty of its true heir, and his cousins was also established to a shocking degree. She'd even come to accept that they had returned, but at present those demons were unable to lift so much as a finger to prevent the pair from making good their unhurried escape. Almost impressed, Annette called out the young man's name. D. Annette was surprised to discover she wasn't the one speaking. I must have heard your name 101 times in the village of Iagos, someone said to him. I asked 101 people who the most powerful vampire hunter was. And the look of bliss on Edith's faces as they spoke of you. How they went on about your beauty, your physique, your sword. And the unearthly air about you. And not once in 101 times did they fail to mention your name. His tone suddenly shifted to gloom. We shall let you go for the time being. However, next time our swords will pierce you. Know that there shall never be a third meeting between us. A flash of light picked the speaker out starkly. Beneath a head of blazing red hair was a pair of blood-hued eyes brighter than flames that reflected the two riders. I'm Zeno Gillian, son of Grand Duke Zeno Dawn. White light picked out a second face. It was a young man with an aquiline nose, wearing an ornate jacket reminiscent of formal attire. I'm Zeno Gillian. Zeno Gorshin. I'll be seeing you. The third face glowed starkly. Unlike the first two, the long-haired youth almost seemed like a monk in his threadbare cape and horribly worn clothing. He had a giant scythe across his back. From generation to generation, the Grim Reaper has been called Benelli by the Zeno clan, and that is my name. The fourth one squinted in the light. With a pair of crossed long swords strapped to his back, he had a youthful visage, but was still colored by the nihilism of the horribly aged. Zeno Braylo, and don't forget it. And though he didn't lift a finger, the sound of his voice alone was enough to raise a clang from his back. The pair of blades had slid up and down as if writhing about. With the fifth gone, that left these four. And when their eyes gave off the death light, and their hands took up swords, and their fangs were stained with blood, how many souls would be taken from their creator? Lightning flashed and thunder followed. On hearing a hoarse voice from the vicinity of the Black Rider's left hip, and net bugged her eyes. Well, I'll be. There are two people up in the sky mixing it up. Oh, one of them got whomped, I think. They're going down. But run for it. Something else is coming down too. Before the hoarse voice could even finish speaking, the four vampires and the horse with two riders were racing off. Dee and Annette were headed for the bottom of the slope, while the four from the Zeno clan made for the top of the pass. It was 7 seconds after the silvery cylinder dropped that 1,000,000 degrees of blistering heat vaporized the entire pass. First part, and